All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Sebo?
Well, you had talked about on our last one, you wanted to talk about a few more things with the Ukraine, as you said there's new developments.
Hmm.
And if we've got time, we can probably riff on uh, the current events that have been progressing here, with like Elon and Trump's talk. If you listen to any of that, uh, the breakdancing championships in the Olympics. But there's actually that ties into what we talked about in our last one too, because it actually it's part of the message. And then we can talk about how annoying the hardcore Trump supporters are based on that meme I sent you. Uh,
Oh, jeez.
so we have all those options after you're done with your part. Let me. I forgot to check comments. Let me check to see if we have any comments while you get your stuff ready.
Um, no, I'm sorry. I just got completely distracted because when my wife sent me a text and I checked it to make sure it wasn't anything critical, uh, that I needed to respond to right away, and it is quote, doing some quarterly training and learned that I've inadvertently been giving the silent distress signal for domestic violence slash abduction. Sorry about that. What? What? Oh dear. Am I gonna get a
Uh,
visit from someone? As if what we talk about online wasn't already having me on a list somewhere. Speaking of lists, let's get to comments from Ideals Are Isomorphic because he's certainly on a list and you know, good luck and Godspeed, friend. You're awfully frank with your internet comments considering where you live. I'd asked at the end of our Wheel of Time episode if he was in the European part or the Eastern part, which is, and he said he's in St. Petersburg, and that indeed the European part is wildly different from from the Eastern part, which is just you know wild frontier. It's all tundra or forest or desert. It's just look at if you don't understand the scale of Russia, look at a time zone map because Russia has either it's like 11 or 12. It's a ridiculous number of time zones and we think the US is big and it is. It's bigger than a lot of people realize. We have four time zones, not counting Alaska and Hawaii. We have four time zones in the continental United States. I mean, it is literally night on one side of Russia and daytime on the other side of Russia, or morning and evening. It's ridiculous. Um, but it, he also made a point that kind of inadvertently maybe fed into what I was talking about. Um, I think it was our last social episode. I don't even remember why I brought it up about the CIA being surprised at the house of cards that was the USSR and the Eastern Bloc. And that's part of what's going on here. And I think part of what frustrates me about the kind of insanity around um, the commentary on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is that let me find his post here. It's mostly due the difference between the eastern part of Russia and the European part of Russia, it quote, it's mostly due to extreme centralization of resources. All the oil and gas profits get funneled into Moscow, which is truly a marvelous city, one of the greatest cities currently. It's also why Tucker Carlson, as much as I like him, received some due criticism after his trip to Moscow. He was shown a colossus on the legs of clay, the implication that being that Russia is like Moscow. Meanwhile, the rest of Russia lives in abject, almost artificially manufactured poverty. Um, and this was on display actually recently, a couple weeks ago. I've said before, the way I tend to unwind is get in bed and turn on a nature documentary because that helps me de-stress, forget about life and the world, and it's just I like nature. This lets me vicariously be out in nature. And I, as I mentioned, I was watching a documentary of a nature photographer trying to capture film of Siberian tigers in the wild because it's becoming increasingly difficult because of how endangered they are. Um, and the places he stayed at, these were, he called them camps, but they were permanent facilities where people lived for months at a time doing research, biologists and other scientists doing research out here. And it was like, think of the whitish trash, dirt poor Appalachia. And that was how these people lived, and he even including a place where he went where there was a guy who worked for the government in, kind of resource management, and his family of five is, you know, is living in a place without running water. And that is vast amounts of Russia. But and if you want a good concise critique of Tucker's interview with Putin, go watch Konstantin Kissin's response to it because it was only like 10 or 15 minutes. And as usual, it was very, very good and very insightful. One, because he's smart, and two, because he came from Russia, or the USSR. I don't remember if it was Russia exactly. Anyway, it's important to remember where Putin came from. Putin was a high-level KGB agent, or I don't know if he was an agent. He was KGB, and part of the KGB was disinformation. One of the reasons the West was so surprised that the Eastern Bloc fell like a house of cards was, I contend, partly because the CIA was helping prop it up, at least in our minds, so that the military industrial intelligence complex could continue to get trillions of dollars in funding. But the other reason was because that was part of the KGB efforts of propaganda, of convincing the people that were being ruled that everything was great and the West was terrible, or at the least everything was fine and the West was worse. And Putin has carried that into his rule of Russia. It has all been carefully crafted and manufactured. I mean, think about his silly shirtless pics, horse riding, and his, the fact that he's this great judoka, which may or may not be true. I'm not a judo guy, so I don't know, but I have heard people who are judo people who have seen, the video and go, yeah, he's not that awesome. He's okay, but he's not that awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, as awesome as he is, touted to be. And this is one of the problems with evaluating this whole Russia Ukraine thing is what is real. And we just don't know because Russia, Putin's regime is a facade. So, how strong is it and what exactly is going on? We don't know. As I've said before, Ukraine's not a country, it's a giant laundromat. So, what is going on? We don't know. And it's interesting to note, you know, it seems like this is like the first social media war because you see so many pictures and videos and things popping up on social media. But considering how ubiquitous smartphones are, you would actually expect more. I feel like we actually don't have as much information as we should, considering you know, uh, how easy it is to get information out these days that from both sides, what supposedly objective information we're getting just to me all seems carefully crafted.
Hmm. Well, I think part of that is if you see what's happening when remember with the stink when Musk was kind of conceding to Brazilian law in Brazil, the servers around the world are subject to the laws of the areas they're in. So the information we're getting is curated. Stuff coming out of the Ukraine is based on what they let come out of the Ukraine. Same thing in Russia. Now, some bits get through with independent media, satellite uh, communication, and things like that, but
Mm-hmm.
it little bits getting through here and there are easy to shoot down. Whereas this big giant, the mass of information we get that is curated because it's subject to whatever region it's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like it's going to be the first time that we get reporters that are American, supposedly unbiased, being given the 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 only report this or else coming out of there. Remember the famines back in the Soviet Union.
Yeah,
Can't remember that guy's name that was taken on the
the
train.
the Holodomor,
Yeah.
where the Ukrainians were purposely starved. Something like 6 million Ukrainians died of starvation under Stalin in the 30s, and I don't remember his name either, but there's a very infamous New York Times reporter who was all in for communism, and he knew what was going on, and he reported that everything under Stalin was awesome
Hmm.
and that the economy was booming and growing and they were rapidly, modernizing and all this. And he knew what was going on and he ignored it because he was all in for the greater good.
Hmm.
And how much of the greater good is what's going on now? Um, and with that in mind, um, not that yet. I referenced this, and I'm gonna um just bring up the page real quick so you can see the video for anyone who's interested. It's an hour and a half long, and I still haven't gotten all the way through it because I keep having to stop because I like this guy because he makes me laugh, but also because he's pretty insightful. His channel name is Laser Pig, which itself is a joke, which I'll explain in a second. It's kind of an inside joke for history nerds, Cold War history nerds. And the title of his latest video is "How to Kill a God," and it starts with the Carlson Putin interview, and then it just kind of spirals out of control from there. But um, one of the reasons I keep having to stop is because when it comes to evaluating Russia, he literally has experience in the field. He's a bit cagey about what exactly he's done, but he has worked in the intelligence slash defense sphere in the UK, and so he knows what he's talking about. Um, he doesn't know what he's talking about when it comes to American politics. And yes, there is a sliver of the MAGA right that thinks Putin is in the right here. That, but even they, of the ones I've seen, they recognize that he's not a good guy. They just think he's more right than the globalist Europeans and the corrupt Ukrainians. It is we had a saying in the Cold War that this is why we, for instance, South Korea is now this beacon of modernity, industry, and now even pop culture, which is a pretty small country of South Korea, and yet their reach in music and television and movies now is vastly exceeding, their size.
I think that's a psyop.
I don't I'm not sure, but let's hold off on that rabbit hole for a second. But it's important to remember that things started out pretty rough for South Korea, and I don't just mean the war. Is They were a dictatorship. They are much more democratic now, although they still have some issues. They're much more democratic now, but they were a full-on dictatorship in their first several decades of existence. But the saying was, Syngman Rhee, the dictator of South Korea, He's a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. And that was the saying both in the defense intelligence community and in the popular culture punditry was, yeah, he's our son of a bitch, which not a good guy, but better than what a communist would be. Same thing with Bautista versus Castro in Cuba. So even though that sliver, and it is a sliver, it is not the whole right, it's not even the whole MAGA right, it is a sliver of the MAGA right who thinks that Russia are the good guys here, or at least the not as bad guys. And I said last time, and I think it is worth reiterating, that really what the skeptics of this war are so highly skeptical about is that this seems to be nationalist fascists versus internationalist fascists.
Mm-hmm.
And so, one, is there a side worth picking if you're looking at it under those terms? And two, the other thing that Laserpig isn't getting is that the reason the right is so highly critical of propping up Ukraine is we have no money. Look at our deficit is in the trillions of dollars. Look at our debt, which is in the tens of trillions of dollars. And then I've brought this up before, and I'm going to keep hammering on it. Look at our unfunded liabilities. Go look up that term. Unfunded liabilities is in the hundreds of trillions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
We are a broke nation. We are propped up because of the strength of the US dollar and the US economy, which is its own issue that we might have to talk about in depth at some point. So, why are we sending billions of dollars to Ukraine? And I don't buy yeah, but it's not going to Ukraine, it's going to US defense industries, and then they ship over the weapons and weapon systems. Well, first of all, I don't buy that because
I buy it to some extent because it does explain some politicians' behavior. Like Crenshaw is a great example. Big portion of his constituency makes that stuff.
yep.
So he's actually, even though I hate that he's doing it, being a good politician to his district
Mm-hmm.
by supporting this because it's better for his economy.
And it is true that a lot of what was sent over was stuff that was in reserve, that was in our stockpiles. And so then what that special funding is paying for is to restock those stockpiles. But there is absolutely no oversight on this money. Every single one of these special resolutions for aid to Ukraine, the critics of it, both outside and inside of Congress, are saying, hold up, wait a minute, where's the oversight? There is no oversight on this money to make sure what we say we're spending it on is actually what it's being spent on. And I will use this example again because to me it is one of the most galling, because wherever you stand on this issue, if you are a human being, you should have a high degree of empathy for the Ukrainian civilians and soldiers, as well as the Russian soldiers who are suffering, dying, being wounded, being left homeless from this war. And a group called Mighty Oaks, which is a nonprofit started by a former Green Beret, they got tens of thousands of dollars together and bought up a bunch of just basic first aid kits and took them over there in the earliest months of the war. Not only took them over there, but then trained Ukrainians on in basic combat first aid and medicine. And the Ukrainians were floored because they had none. They had nothing. And we had already spent billions of dollars in aid. And this guy, and listening to him in an interview with Glenn Beck, his point was, what are we spending this money on if they don't even have the most basic of first aid kits? Because that is something that is incredibly simple,
Mm-hmm.
fairly cheap, but has a huge impact. So again, Where's the oversight? Who's deciding how this money is being spent? And we already know. Don't tell me that it's all just, oh, it's all going to US companies, because there have been several reports of high level Ukrainian generals and civilian defense officials being arrested or fleeing the country because they're embezzling millions of dollars.
Hmm. Well, and how do you expect us to have oversight like that when we keep getting reports of, oh, in an accidental clerical error, we sent another 6 billion that we didn't know about? How do you have a clerical error of just military equipment?
Mm-hmm.
No, no.
Yeah. And on the other side of that, but besides the what are we spending all this money on when we have our own issues, very, very serious issues, that it is not hyperbole to say that the fentanyl crisis is a soft war being waged by China, because these precursors are coming from China. They keep saying, no, it's not us. But we know for a fact that all these precursors are coming from China to the Central American cartels and then being
Well,
shipped over the open border.
that there's a hidden implication with that because then you could say we're actually having a soft war with the Mexican cartels
Mm-hmm.
because they're
So
they're complicit in the smuggling aspect of that.
yes, I can have a high degree of empathy for what the Ukrainian people are suffering through and want to help them, but when the cabin loses pressure, you put your own oxygen mask on first before you help the person next to you,
Hmm.
because otherwise you're both screwed.
If
And
anybody's
that's the
never done
situation we're in.
hypoxia training, you don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's uh uh gosh, there are a number of I know NASA has done this, of having astronauts do, like, putting them through rigorous stuff that messes with your head, and then, okay, now do this child's puzzle.
Oh,
The
so
little shapes go in the shapes, and you're like,
I had to do the altitude training and the flight training for one of the research projects I was on. The one I went on the Vomit Comet. We had to do all of that before you're even allowed on there. And they give you like a quiz and stupid stuff. Like it's like, what's the opposite on the color wheel from this? But and you go through and you get 100%. And then
this is dumb. Why are they
at
making me do this?
at different altitudes, you get the exact same test. So you already know the answers. And it's an easy test. And by the end, after everybody comes down from it and you reacclimate to sea level, they give you your stack of tests and you're like,
Mhm.
oh, you're like drawing stick figures and you're doing all kinds of stuff. It's like you don't know. And it happens like that. You don't even know when you don't know.
Mhm.
So yeah, when the oxygen masks come down, put yours on first.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we aren't even we don't even have an oxygen mask. Is the way the government is acting right now,
Yeah,
there
we do. It's
isn't even
called the
an
Keystone
oxygen mask to put
Pipeline.
on. Well, yeah, that's another thing. But
Yeah.
um
And a secure border. Those could be oxygen masks.
so last thought on Russia Ukraine from me is the inside joke of Laser Pig. Okay. The name comes from Laser Bear. Now, what the Laser Bear was is, if you want to go down a fun rabbit hole, go look up videos on the insane engineering of the F-15. The F-15 scared the crap out of the Soviets because the I don't remember what it was. I don't remember if it was one of the MiGs or one of the Sukhois, but one of the more modern aircraft they built in the mid late 70s, they claimed it could do all these amazing things. Okay, it couldn't. But the US either believed it or chose to believe it and said, oh crap, we need to do something to counter this incredible thing. And so they built the F 15 which to this day is one of the more widely exported weapon systems that we make. And it has a kill to death ratio of something like 114 to 0. Okay. An Israeli pilot in, I don't remember which war, landed an F-15 with half of one of his wings blown off because it's just that aerodynamic and that stable that he had half his wing blown off and he didn't even know it. He just, because there was so much smoke, he couldn't see it. He just knew he had heavy damage. So the laser bear is that inside joke for Cold War nerds because there's this group of people that would believe anything that the Soviets said. That, oh my gosh, they've bred bears for war that shoot lasers out of their eyes. We have to counter this. And that's the hyperbole of the joke, but it's not that much hyperbole because we knew that the Russians were playing around with marine mammals to try and train them to do stuff. And so the US Navy had to do it too. And it was projects that spent a lot of money and never came up with anything useful. But it was done because, oh my gosh, the Soviets are doing this. And there was no voice of reason in the room to say, I think it's bullshit.
Didn't we train dolphins to find mines?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
something useful came out of it.
And that was in response to stuff that was, but the electronic systems were better at it. And so we spent a lot of money to do something that was interesting and quasi useful, but ultimately, you know, the opportunity cost wasn't worth it. So there is that element of oh my gosh, you know, laser bears. On the other hand, there are credible people with that I trust who have connections and are saying things like I think it was a year ago that I heard Tim Kennedy on an interview with somebody talking about his sources are telling him that all of these casualties that the Russians are suffering, they're all border troops. They're all that Putin is using this war to purge troublesome populations like the Chechens, like the Central Asians, like the ethnic Chinese who live out in that eastern part that we were talking about at the beginning, out in Siberia. There's a lot of ethnic Chinese that are Russian, that speak Russian, but there's actually a term for it. You know, you tell Konstantin Kisin he's a racist because I got this term from him, not me, is the yellowing of Russia.
Hmm.
He actually said the Russian phrase for it. I don't remember what it was because it's a weird language. But uh, so Kennedy talked about how he's using this war to basically perpetrate a genocide on his own people. A democide is the technical term for it. He is feeding all of these less capable troops from troublesome populations into the meat grinder, and he hasn't even committed most of his quality troops yet.
Well, that would go right with the comment about what Moscow, the centralization of resources. It's now, but two things can be true at once. And if you kind of want to take Occam's razor to this, is he's in the war for the reasons he said, but there's while we're here, let's use these people first.
There's also an element of another person I trust, Jason Buttrell, who's the head researcher for Glenn Beck, and he's former Army intelligence, but before that he was an enlisted Marine, so he's seen both sides. He's been a rifleman, boots on the ground, door kicker, and he's seen the intelligence side of it. And his sources were telling him that all these early pictures of all these destroyed vehicles, that these vehicles were full of riot gear, not weapon systems, which indicated to him that Putin went in expecting that this was going to be a cakewalk and this was going to be, they were going to go right into an occupation. So On the one hand, yes, laser bear, be careful you don't fall for that. On the other hand, the Ukraine is winning hype, can we believe that? I don't know, because it certainly looks like from the way the war started, Russia got its butt kicked because they went in not expecting a war, expecting an occupation, which is basically is not that absurd of a thought, because that's what happened in Georgia and that's what happened in Crimea under Obama.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not an absurd thought. And so are we funneling money and propping up a forever war that's going to be a decade of just horrible attrition? I don't know, but I don't
Well,
want to be a part of that.
the sad thing is, I don't think it'll be a decade of that because I think the big guns come out before a decade because there's too much other stuff going on
Well,
around the world.
you say that, but one of the new developments before after I said, because I wasn't paying attention, so I don't remember exactly when this happened, but when I said I wanted to talk about Ukraine because it'd been a while and I had thoughts, it was mostly because of that laser pig video. And then I actually got to looking at news and going, wait, the Ukrainians are invading Russia and attacking Kursk? Kursk Part 2, Electric Boogaloo? This is part of the, and this is part of the laser bear thing, is Putin has been saying this is a red line. I will unleash my strategic weapons, nukes. He's been threatening. It's like every other day he threatens to nuke if this or that happens. Well, Ukraine seems to have called its bluff by crossing into Russian territory. And so far, there hasn't been much of a response. So again, you know, laser bear forever war.
I'm
I don't know.
talking more along the lines of what us, the US, and our allies in NATO and around the world are doing in Iran.
Mm,
Because I think that's because, I mean, Iran is an ally of Russia.
mhm.
And, who knows what that, because why are we so big on Iran right now, all of a sudden, after we've Russia'd everything for a while? Well, because if we hit Iran, we hurt Russia. Or we think we do.
Well, and we
Yeah.
help Israel, which is
Mhm.
now everyone was expecting this to happen sooner, but Hezbollah has finally started firing into northern Israel. So now Israel is having to deal with a two-front war.
Mhm. Yeah, and that brings Lebanon in, that brings Iran in, and who knows what Iraq does at this point because that whole regime change thing didn't work out quite the way we expected it to.
Yeah.
Imagine that. And then we've got this going on in Afghanistan. Did you see this today? On the anniversary of our pullout,
Yep.
where we gave up all our equipment.
Yep.
That all would be nice right now.
Those rhinos are not cheap either.
No, no,
No.
those are not cheap. And is this the right video? Oh yeah, the things we said. Oh, they can't fly it anyways. Those Warhawk helicopters. Here we go. They can't fly them anyways, so it's okay. I
Hmm.
guess they figured it out. I don't know how many they crashed in the process, but they figured it out.
I don't know, but we know they have computers, and there are sims out there of any aircraft you would ever want to learn to fly.
Hmm.
So don't say, well, they can't fly it anyway. No, under normal strong leadership, we would call that a target rich environment. But that is not the leadership that we are operating under.
What
That
leadership?
exactly.
One's not doing
Who's
anything, and the
who
other is not doing anything unless you vote her into office.
I'm still waiting for members of the press to ask who's actually in charge.
I
They
would
don't even
settle
ask
for I would settle
themselves,
for
let
what are
alone
you
ask the
actually
president.
doing? I would say I would
Uh-huh.
settle for that. What
Yeah,
are you doing now? I mean, are we just waiting it out till November?
January. He's still president until January.
Yeah.
We need to remember that is that no matter what happens in November, Biden is the president till January, whatever. Is it the 15th is inauguration day? I don't remember, but middle of January. So that's a lot of time for things to get worse. and things can always get worse.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one thing people don't consider is the last hurrah. Well, I got voted out. I've got control, and now I've got a month and a half, almost 2 months to go to war with Iran. I'm the commander in chief.
Well, our saving grace here may be how utterly corrupt the Biden family is, because there have already been reports that he's using his last months in office to travel the world. And all presidents do this, and it's slimy, and I hate it, which is we're going to spend millions, probably hundreds of millions when you talk about the security costs for the president to basically give a free world vacation to the president and his family. But on top of that, when you have someone as corrupt as the Bidens, is also to make foreign connections to make more foreign money
Mm-hmm.
through influence peddling. So our saving grace here may be that they are so craven money grubbers that they may be too busy trying to shore up their bank accounts, so they won't be stopping any of this, pre-World War III stuff, but they won't be escalating it either, maybe.
Yeah, you just never know what people are going to do in their last days, a big fu. This is the thing everybody worried about with Trump. Well, he did misbehave in his last days. I mean, it's somewhere between the press coverage and what his fanboys would tell you, but it still was something. And Biden's been known to lash out too. He's got a temper on him as well. And don't underestimate what Tulsi says that got her on a terrorist list about Kamala.
Jeez, I forgot about that. Yeah.
She's afraid of what Kamala's going to do to look like the tough, strong president when it comes
Yeah.
to foreign policy. So,
yeah, I still haven't listened to that because I'm afraid it's going to be too depressing. Of a couple episodes ago, Tulsi Gabbard is on Modern Wisdom with Chris Williamson, and
but
it's
I heard her say that way before that when she was on
yeah,
Rogan. Yeah.
yeah. But I think the title of the episode is something like "Who Actually Runs the Government." Which geez, this is a lady that would know.
Mm-hmm.
She's now a colonel, I think, in the reserves. Um, and she was a congresswoman. Did she run for governor of
No,
Hawaii?
no.
No. Okay. I remember there being talk of it, but I don't remember if she actually ran. Now that she's an independent, that might be a tough hill to climb. If BJ Penn couldn't get anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
with his name recognition and celebrity status, then I'm sad to say that place may be a lost cause, which is too bad because to me the Hawaii is the most beautiful place in the world, and I haven't traveled everywhere, but I've traveled, and of all the cool places we got to go growing up as an army brat, Hawaii was the only place I ever wanted to go back to, and I have been a couple times now. So, do you have any final thoughts on the Ukraine situation?
Well, back to Russia actually, because Isomorphic also made a
Yeah,
comment
I was going to
about.
pause there a second before we go on to that.
Oh, okay, then no, not on the specifics of the Ukraine, no.
Because there's another comment here that I think segues perfectly from the Russia situation to current US politics. All right, so let me bring up Ideal's comment here that segues so hilariously, wonderfully into from Russian politics to US politics. And then I couldn't find the article I was looking for, but I found a few others, and then I'll go into detail about what I'm talking about here. Okay. Living in Russia, where elections are routinely falsified by a comprehensive, several layers deep system of fraud, it was very funny to see how naive you Americans are when it comes to voter fraud. The left had a very hysterical reaction to allegations of voter fraud. They acted as if the world owes them evidence. They acted as if the job of a detective is not needed because whenever there is a crime committed, the evidence supposedly should be self-evident and available to everyone before the investigation is carried out. As if the irregularities of circumstances in those four countries Heath mentioned weren't enough to start inquiring, or counties, as if the mail-in batches going 95-5 for Biden is statistically possible. After so many people got led on and had their ego invested in a narrative by the media, they were, and as an aside, I would point out to both sides, because there were hysterical narratives on both sides that obscured what was really going on, which was really bad. They are ready to retreat in more and more obscure possibilities to keep every piece of their worldview intact. That's the biggest lesson. It's very hard to figure a way out of this. And I suspect the honeymoon polls for Kamala could be used to manufacture a possibility for the left to retreat into later after they commit even more egregious voter fraud. Absolutely. That is the point of these polls. These polls are not polls, they are a psyop. They are to set a narrative. As a reminder, there were pre-election polls in 2020 that had Biden up double digits in key battleground states like Wisconsin. That was absurd. That was never going to happen. But it let them say, oh, Trump did better than we thought, but Biden still won, which is not surprising because the polling had him up so high. Bullcrap. It was to set the narrative. It was, instead of the margin of error of an actual scientific statistical poll, we now have the margin of cheating. Here's where this connects to Russia and why this is concerning. And I couldn't find, back when I was blogging, and I gave up on that, and I couldn't find the stories I used when I wrote about this. This is really concerning to me and is not being talked about, to Ideal's point here, because the narrative is what matters, not the facts. And the narrative of the 2016 election was Russian collusion. And it's ridiculous how many people still believe that narrative, no matter how many times it's been debunked. Much like the good people on both sides, which even Snopes, for crying out loud, is now saying.
Which is making
false.
its rounds again, including by Kamala Harris's HQ herself.
Yep. Okay. So what was actually concerning about Russia wasn't any sort of collusion, wasn't any sort of propping up of Trump. Ultimately, there were something like, I don't know, $30,000 to $50,000 worth of Facebook ads that were paid for by Russia or Russian groups that were pro-Trump. And that was the provable, like the hard evidence of Russia supporting Trump. So it was always ridiculous. And the way Russian intelligence works, and again, I'm not an expert, but I have studied this stuff and I listen to people who are experts. I think that was a smokescreen. I think the Facebook ads and the frankly, the stuff that was just silly, I think that was a smokescreen for this stuff, which was that Russia, China, North Korea are all hackers' paradises. They employ directly or indirectly hackers to mess with the West and the US. And this is New York Times from 2019, reporting about a Senate Intelligence Committee that concluded the election systems in all 50 states were targeted by Russia in 2016. And that there were hacking attempts. Okay. Now this Intelligence Committee report says 50 states. This Vox article says 39 states in the 2016 presidential election. And there's this The Intercept article on an NSA report. Now, what I was looking for and I couldn't find because I can't remember which website it was, but the article I used and I trusted more because it was more nuanced, it was more technical. It was from a tech website, not a news website. I don't remember which one, but it was one of those that mostly reports on, high tech stories, what's going on in tech. And one of the points they made in their article was that, to Ideal's point, the reason it is so easy in a place like Russia to manufacture election results is because you have a centralized system. Not only does the US have 50 different election systems, because per the Constitution, the states themselves run their elections, even the federal elections, is that then within those 50 state systems, you have hundreds. Yeah.
Yeah, just so for those that are listening, and just so we can't be accused of using biased sources to our point, this is Politico, which is biased in the opposite direction. The nation's best hackers found vulnerabilities in voting machines, but no time to fix them.
It was either in 2014 or 2015. There was a PBS documentary that came out that one talked about the vulnerabilities, the ease of fraud in mail-in ballots, and two, the danger of electronic voting machines where they had someone in real time hack a voting machine. That documentary was conveniently memory holed after the 2016 results for the narrative. Again, it's all about the narrative. Here's what's important about the Russia, and this is just what we know or suspect. You can guarantee if we know that Russia did this, then we probably don't know that China and or North Korea were also doing it. The saving grace of the American system was that, according to the tech nerds, the geeks article that I used, was that they got stumped because there's no central system, because they were able to make inroads hacking into specific precincts, but then every precinct has its own thing or different thing. So this precinct and that precinct might do things the same way. So I found an in here. I found a back door into this precinct system, so I can use it on that precinct too. Oh crap, but over there, that's a whole totally different system. So now I got to find another way in. And then you have some places that still don't use electronic stuff. It's all still paper. So you can't get into it. So the saving grace there was and the reason I was writing about this back in 2016 is because after that, the Democrats made this big push to federalize all elections. Besides being blatantly unconstitutional, that is an idiotic idea, because then if there is a failure, the whole system fails. What saved us in the 2016 election, apparently, as far as this Russian hacking goes, was the fact that we do have a federalized system. We have a localized system. So any hacking attempt, any attempt to cheat on a large scale, is going to have to mess with thousands of different systems. However, as I said, and Ideals reiterated in his point, what happened in 2016 was basically 4 counties. It was whatever county is Madison, Wisconsin, Detroit in Michigan, Philly in Pennsylvania, and then Atlanta in Georgia. That was all that was needed, because those races, those swing states, were so close.
Mm-hmm.
All you needed was to push a key county in that key state over one way or another. And that is why the narrative from the media is so despicable, because they know damn well that there were shenanigans.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to think that the election was stolen to think there was some shady stuff going on here. And on the one hand, you're saying, absolutely not, this was the safest, fairest election of all time. And if you say otherwise, you're banned on Facebook, you're banned on YouTube, you're pre-Elon banned on Twitter. But on the other hand, Trump only won in 2016 because of election interference. Well, which is it?
Mm-hmm.
Which is it? And to think that it's not going to happen again, and that was what I was writing about back in 2016 was, hold on a second. The intelligence experts that this geek article talked about, it may have been Wired, I don't remember what magazine it was, but the intelligence experts they talked to said it didn't look to them like this was a serious attempt to impact the election results, but what this was a dry run. They were casing the joint. Uh-oh. So because we were so busy shouting about the narrative, so far as I can tell, nothing substantial was actually done in most places. Nothing substantial was actually done to strengthen the system against outside interference. Whether that outside be a foreign power or a national group trying to push things one way or the other.
Well, I mean, that that's on both sides because they want it to be an issue every year.
Mm-hmm.
Both sides do because they want to have the court cases and they want to be able to swing a very close election with those court cases.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as they keep it a problem and keep us fighting about it, you know, they have that opportunity. If they do something that, you know, maybe makes it harder for these things to happen, like no universal mail-in ballots and unhackable systems, or at least systems that have zero access to any kind of Wi-Fi, which was discovered in the Arizona cases that they did. I don't mind machine counting. I mean, it's just like having your test scored on a Scantron, right? As long as there's, I mean, but you can have that machine with zero access to Wi-Fi. I would be in favor of bringing back the old machines from back in the day.
Mm-hmm. Hold on a second. You just, all right, bring this back up here. All right, I've shared this before, but again, December 2020, the ballless Wisconsin Supreme Court rules Trump election challenge unreasonable in the extreme. Well, okay, that's the that's the talking point. That's the eye-catching headline, unreasonable in the extreme. But the legal ruling was standing.
Mm-hmm. Is this the
All
one
of
that
these.
currently that went back to court and it got, oh, never mind. I'll
Yep.
let you talk. I'll
Here
let
we
you talk.
go. So it's important to remember that all of these election challenges, well, no court upheld Trump, blah, blah, blah. Everyone threw it out either for standing or for some other similar such issue. None of the Trump election challenges cases were decided on the merits. And then a year or two afterwards, the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled that, oh, yeah, most ballot drop boxes are totally unconstitutional and illegal. And now they're revisiting that ban. I'm sure that'll end well. This is from May of this year. So, yeah, I'm sure the narrative is not going to sway things in Wisconsin, which is a key battleground swing state in this election. Yeah, I'm sure, because they initially ruled a year and a half after the fact when it didn't matter. Oh, yeah, you totally shouldn't have been able to do that Dropbox stuff, meaning none of those votes should have counted. Because again, the narrative is what matters, and you need to go to the primary sources. All right. So Rudy Giuliani was said to be this nutcase, the guy who brought down the mob as a federal AG, the guy who turned Times Square into a place full of hookers and used needles into a tourist attraction and made New York City one of the safest large metros in the world and shepherded that city through the 9/11 aftermath. Yes, that guy suddenly lost his mind and became a moron. Or you could go watch Rudy Giuliani's actual testimony in front of special legislative sessions in Arizona, in Georgia. I don't think Pennsylvania ever let him talk. But go watch what he actually says. Go watch the evidence that he actually presents. What the narrative did is it conflated what Rudy Giuliani was saying, which was none of these drop boxes have a chain of custody. Therefore, none of these votes should count because you cannot verify that any of these ballots are legitimate because there is no chain of custody. One. Two, all of these ballot drop boxes were done through judicial decree, and the Constitution clearly says the legislatures of the individual states make the rules for elections within certain constitutional parameters. What the narrative did is, and I love this guy's biography of Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy, who was a coke fiend who ruined his life and then got sober and became a multimillionaire through this small business that he created that became a big business. But he helped ruin the attempts at pushing through the narrative because he and others, now he, I believe, was a true believer and just wanted to get to what he thought was the truth. But he helped fund some people who I think were just pure grifters, who were focusing in on the most sensationalistic parts of the narrative about, the voting machines themselves and servers that were out of the country, and all of that stuff is important and sketchy, but what was provable in the short amount of time that we had between the election and the inauguration, what was provable was what Giuliani was saying, because the guy is still a lawyer, and even at his age, he's still sharp. And he was saying, no, we have verifiable, provable, blatant black letter law. This isn't right. And so what the narrative did is it conflated what guys like Mike Lindell were doing with what Rudy Giuliani was saying to paint the whole criticism of the 2020 election as just a bunch of nut jobs.
Well, in defense of the people attacking that legal team, there was a nut job on the legal team, and that was Sidney Powell. And she was the lead of the legal team, because that's how Trump rolls, put a female in the lead because he's so misogynistic. But he that, I mean, look at his legal team right now. But yeah, he put her in the lead as the face, and Giuliani, I think, was a victim of that bad decision in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
No, a victim of biased media, of course, too. But that bad decision gave them ammo to do that.
And nothing has been fixed.
Well,
and the narrative is still in place.
Yeah, I want to bring up the this is important with narrative, because the real fraud of that 2020 cycle, we can talk about ballot boxes and all of these things, which was true, but it was the media itself. We just talked about that being part of the psyop to make everything believable, but in and of itself, it's a psyop. Because it's like, what was the Ash experiment, where they had the different length lines, and there was one real person being studied and 5 other people that were patsies, and they would say to the shortest line, oh, that's the longest. And that 5th one would be like, yeah, it's the longest. Yeah, that's a lot of what's happening. Oh, everybody loves her. Everybody loves her. Oh yeah, I love her too. I'm a good Democrat. I didn't say I disapprove on that previous poll from 3 days ago. I approved on the one from today, and just the lies that are coming. The Time magazine cover fiasco that we have now. It was supposed to be Trump holding his fist up. The rest of the media, that's not Time magazine, said, whoa, hey, you're propping up a person. So they changed it to, oh, just so happened the news story that came out right the next day, so they can control the narrative. Biden and Harris walking apart. And then we get the Time magazine cover we have now with uh, the majestic drawing of Harris. Then we got Harris herself. I mean, right here from her own Twitter headquarters. Yesterday, we got a fresh reminder of that Donald Trump's Project 2025 agenda will ban medical abortion in every state. That is an outright lie.
Mm-hmm.
There is no truth in there.
Mm-hmm.
I can find the speech if you want me to of Donald Trump saying this 2025 thing that's actually very radical. It's very radical. There's a lot of radical
Yep.
things in there. The
That it
criticism is
was not
right, and it's not mine.
it was not Trump's, it was the Heritage Foundation, which is one of
Mm-hmm.
the oldest conservative think tank slash brain fart um lobbying organizations in DC. It came from the Heritage Foundation. And I love Project 2025. I think it was great. I just think the way they went about it wasn't good. And that's why they're getting hammered.
Mm-hmm.
And you can go listen to Steve Deace if you want more on that. He has an episode on Project 2025 and what went wrong with it. And this is a guy who's worked on campaigns, so he's very insightful in it. But I want to stay on the narrative part of it because you brought up the Time magazine cover of Kamala looking awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've seen a number of memes of that cover with the Trump meltdown, which is just an orange face melting. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, yeah, you're totally a news organization. But what I immediately thought of though
Remember, this
was
is the news organization that bragged about everything they did in the 2020 elections. So that's important.
the secret history of the shadow campaign that
Oh, yeah, there
saved
you
the
go.
2020 election. But if you say there were any shenanigans whatsoever, you're a conspiracy theorist. This is February 2021. They were bragging about it at the same time. Facebook, pre Elon, Twitter, and YouTube were still banning you if you talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
And here Time is
You could get
bragging
banned
about
for
it.
bringing this article up.
It's like getting banned for sharing CDC and numbers.
Well, but then you also have the reporter from the Washington Post asking Karine Jean-Pierre if the government can do anything to stop the Elon Musk interview of Trump. Really? Can you stop this interview from happening? The press is asking the government to control the press.
But you brought up the video of her running mate now of Tim Walz saying basically there's no such thing as free speech.
Well,
Sorry.
not every free speech is free. Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like no. And well, you got in the UK, you can go to jail for social media posts now.
Oh,
And
the
they
memes
are
for that
going
have been
through with
so
it. They are
awesome.
sentencing people. They are upholding Sharia law. You cannot make fun of Allah on the street. They just sentenced the guy to 2 years in jail because he said who the blank is Allah. And who knows, maybe that gets you banned from YouTube right now. I might have just knocked, but I don't think so because I see a lot of people reporting on it. And they're asking to be able to extradite US citizens who post stuff that they don't like. And I'm like, and Belgium comes out and says, "Oh, that's wrong, UK." Italy comes out and says, "UK, you've gone too far." The country who has the citizens that are supposed to have free speech that the UK is asking to extradite these citizens, crickets. Hasn't said a thing. No statement.
Hey, UK, if you want to know what happens if you try and extradite us for making fun of you, go watch the Fat Electrician's video on Samuel Whitmore. This is one of I didn't even know this story until I watched this video. And I was like, damn it, how did I not know this story? Because this is one of the most awesome Revolutionary War stories ever. Okay. Angry old veteran versus 700 redcoats That's not an exaggeration. Okay. This is one of the best and most hilarious videos that the Fat Electrician has done. Okay. Everyone knows about Lexington and Concord, and that they were that the Minutemen were taking pot shots at them all the way back to Boston. Okay. What people don't know is that right before they got back to Boston, there was one more angry old veteran they had to deal with, because this guy was a veteran of, I don't remember which Indian War because there were a lot, and a veteran of the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War, which he was already old when he went to war with during the 7 Years' War. Uh the sources are a little hazy here, but he was around 80 in 1775. The Redcoats come marching on, going back to Boston, and standing behind his fence is Samuel Whitmore on his farm with a musket, two dueling pistols, and a dueling saber. The dueling, I don't remember which, the pistols or the saber, one of which was acquired in the 7 Years' War. When asked where he got it, he said the former owner no longer had need of them. Which reminds me of the time I asked, okay, this is an aside, but so there were some news organizations that were trying to make a big deal about the fact that JD Vance was at a gun show that had Confederate memorabilia. Yeah, because lots of gun shows have old stuff, because people like to collect old stuff. In the small West Oklahoma town where my parents live, and most of my mom's side of the family lives, there's an old uh gun shop. They do bows and some fishing stuff too, but it's primarily a gun store. And up on the walls above the racks of firearms is all sorts of World War II memorabilia, including a lot of Nazi stuff. The most interesting one to me was when I asked the old man owner about the SS helmet that had a hole in the middle of it. And I asked, where did that come from? And I meant the helmet. He must have thought I meant the hole, because he said, my BAR. Yes, sir. Very good, sir. Okay. I thought of that old man when I was watching this video, because as this entire column, this entire regiment of redcoats are marching back to Boston, 80-year-old Samuel Whitmore fires his musket, drops someone, pulls out his dueling pistols, drops two more, and then pulls out his sword and charges the entire regiment. What happens next? You should go watch the video. But that is the attitude of the people who are roasting the UK right now in the great meme war of 2020.
Oh yeah, the redheaded libertarian. She started a movement that actually ratioed the minister of whatever. They ratioed him with just copies of the U.S. Constitution. Or was it a Declaration of Independence? He was one of those two. But yeah, it was
probably should have been the Declaration, but either one works. Come at me, bro.
Yeah.
How'd that work out for you, buddy? Now, in his defense, this is why Brexit matters and why it happened, because he probably wasn't talking to us. He was talking to EU members, which, had Brexit not happened, it would have been much, much easier to actually do that. That's the world in which we live.
Mm-hmm.
That freedom is the exception, not the rule. Even in places where you think you are free, you aren't really.
Well, and the worrisome thing is it's going to not even be the exception if we just keep letting it go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I needed this one for last week's episode, because it we talked about it more, and we didn't talk about it enough for this one.
You reminded me of it. And
yeah, I don't know if I could describe this one out loud if you're just listening, but if you've ever seen the blonde girl amongst a big group of guys that are probably gifted
Yep.
in a certain area, and then they have the picture of the police commissioner surrounded by a bunch of people who would support Sharia law. I won't name the group out loud on YouTube, but that kind of person, and they're all looming over him as he's giving his speech,
Mm.
as the guys who are very physically gifted are looming over the tiny little blonde girl. So there's your meme. That one would have been better for last week. I'll have to find one for this week. But yeah.
Yikes. This is why I'm leaning more and more, besides the fact that he's said and done some things lately that make me scratch my head, is I'm leaning more and more away from RFK Jr. and towards Trump because I I'm afraid that in order to defeat the narrative and defeat the current regime, the level of victory is going to have to be so overwhelming that either it surpasses the margin of cheating, or the margin of cheating becomes so big that
It has to be obvious.
it has to be blatantly obvious, and only the hardest of hardcore anti-Trump woke crazies will say no, everything's fine here,
Mm-hmm.
and that the other 60% of the nation is going to go WTF, that no, this isn't America, what's going on here?
Yeah, and sadly, actually, Texas might be in play now with all the shenanigans going on with voter rolls.
Mm-hmm.
So, so we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and it doesn't help that the frickin' Republican legislature in Texas tried to impeach our attorney general because he called out the speaker for being an alcoholic drunk while he was on the job.
You know, that might have been a good private conversation first.
Ken Paxton seems like the kind of guy that I will give him the benefit of the doubt that he tried that.
Okay. Yeah.
That he tried that first and that nothing came of it. And that's why he went public and called out the Speaker of the House for it.
But you know what? I'm going to defend the structure of our republic. The guy's still an elected official, and he was like that when he was elected too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if that's what his constituents want, then
Well,
if they keep voting for him,
they may not be paying attention. That's why primaries matter, people.
yeah.
And there
Now
are,
that would have been a place for a primary candidate to call him out,
mhm.
but yeah,
Yeah, primaries matter. I don't know that there are any left. I know that there are some that go very late.
Un
Texas's have been done for months, but I think
unfortunately, Ilhan Omar pulled it through last night. It was
that
close.
she did. But
Yeah.
Royce White, who is a very intellectual, I mean, he says stuff that makes me go, I don't think so, man. But you can tell he's not just spouting talking points or flying off the handle. The guy is very well read. He's also a gigantic black man, and he is now the Republican nominee for Senate in Minnesota.
Hmm.
So he won his primary. Um, he he's an interesting dude. I first discovered him because he was on with on Jason Whitlock's Fearless quite a bit. He's an interesting follow.
Well, we'll probably see more. He might be a pivotal person in this election cycle because of how big Minnesota is, with Walz being the governor there. So
yeah. I want to go deeper into that next time. Let's set that up as our tease, because there's a couple of interesting things that have come from Walz being the nominee that I think are also interesting, because I want to talk a little bit more about something we talked about last time I was down there, which is, how do women feel about Kamala Harris? And I have some anecdotal evidence of people I have talked to that I want to go in a little deeper on, giggity, on women and Kamala Harris. And then Walz figures into that now in some of those anecdotes, now that he's the VP nominee. So we'll talk a little bit about that next time, and maybe what that says about us as people, what that says about the electorate, and maybe what that means for the election. But next time is going to be Wheel of Time, and hopefully we left off because there's a Matt chapter, and that could cause some ranting. And I don't remember how long it is. Annoyingly, it's a pretty short partial chapter, and then it's a long ways before we get back to him. So I'm hoping we can make it all the way back to him so we can start with Matt and then end with Matt. But we'll see how far we get this weekend when we do our Wheel of Time episode.
All right. That sounds good to me. I have nothing else for today.
All right. Thank y'all. We'll see y'all next time.